This is episode 189 of the Mixology Talk podcast. And in this episode, we will be talking about dry January. So we have a special guest, Becker from Rhodes, Rhodes. And we're going to talk to him about some of his favorite non-alcoholic ingredients, beers, wines, mixers, all that fun stuff. So stay tuned. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Mixology Talk podcast. As we know, we're in the middle of dry January, and there's never been a better time to celebrate dry January than in 2021. I don't say that because of all the craziness that's happening in the world, quite the opposite. But the market has definitely responded and heard that people are interested in this subject. So there's a lot of new products out on the market. There's a lot of really cool companies bringing stuff to market. And we happen to have one of those really cool companies here on this podcast. So thanks, Becker. You are from Rhodes, and I appreciate you being on the podcast, man.
Chris, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about what Rhodes does? What does Rhodes kind of represent?
Sure. So in the simplest way to think about it is we're an online marketplace. So Rhodes is, and our mission or goal is really to try to make alcohol-free fun, easy, and great tasting. It's definitely a very new space. I think, from my own experience, and one of the reasons that kind of led me to start Rhodes is a complete lack of knowledge or ignorance about all of the different products that have been out there, and you're starting to see a proliferation. Even there's lots of new artisanal beverages out there of all shapes and sizes, and it was a surprise to see what was out there. And we have brought together I think the largest selection in North America of what's out there. And we're constantly tasting, curating, meeting producers and trying to bring things together in a way that make it easy for people to try this out. Because for a lot of people, it's brand new. So you may not want to, to give you my own experience, right at the beginning, when I was thinking about this, I just wanted some alcohol-free beer. And I was like, I don't want O'Doul's. There's got to be something else out there. So I was working in a Starbucks, doing my, technology consulting, and I was bored. So I ended up spending the whole afternoon searching and finding some products that seemed fairly craft focused, unique. But I also spent, about $150 having, minimum orders shipped and shipping costs, and where I really just wanted to taste one. So I thought maybe there's a better way to try to bring that experience of trying this new beverages in this new space in an easier, cheaper way, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and this is something I was really excited about to have you on the podcast, as I mentioned, kind of offline before this. But there's a lot of other companies out there. There's a lot of companies making non-alcoholic stuff. Absolutely. But I haven't seen anybody kind of pull them all together and kind of wrap their arms around non-alcoholic spirits, beers, wines in one place. That's what I'm really excited about is, talking to you about kind of what you're seeing, all the samples that you're trying, and kind of your perception of what's happening in the industry and some cool products that you could recommend. So, I'm really, really excited having a fun conversation with you about this.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. So,
thanks.
Yeah. And one of my biggest gripes, and I apologize for this in advance, but whenever I think of non-alcoholic spirits, I'm almost 100% disappointed. And the reasoning is, I approach non-alcoholic spirits in the exact same format that I've done with spirits, with full alcohol spirits. Right. I'll open it up, I'll taste it, I'll evaluate it, and I'll think, okay, cool, it would be good in this XYZ. Whenever I have that experience with a non-alcoholic spirit, specifically spirits, I'm almost always disappointed and always kind of like, this doesn't plug into what it should represent. I think Seedlip's done a good job of kind of remarketing themselves for that. But in the broader category, I think when somebody labels it as a bourbon alternative, that's what my mind says it should taste like. And I'm usually pretty disappointed on that. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that and your experience with it.
Yeah. So I think it's very, first of all, I agree with you. And I think there's a lot of work in it's such a young space. There's some growing up that needs to be done, maybe around kind of positioning things and setting some expectations. And Seedlip, I think, is an example of that, where I think they're spending more time talking about recipes. So they have a recipe book that they came out with, which is basically trying to train people on how to use their product, which, ideally you don't have to do. But in this case, I think it's necessary, because you're right. My experience, you open up whatever it happens to be, I won't pick on any one. The idea that you're going to make a martini with a gin alternative isn't really going to happen. And I've been using the analogy to try to paint a picture in people's mind as the difference, say, between Coke and Diet Coke. So yeah, they're both branded the same, but they are different. And I think, I'm old enough to remember when diet drinks first came out. I have a memory as a kid. I was like, this doesn't taste like Coke. And it's like, no, but then you may learn to enjoy it for its own reasons. You may prefer it. And I think there needs to be some information and news to get out there to say, yeah, this is a different type of experience. It's very much an emphasis where there needs to be an emphasis on the cocktails or the mocktails, or what you want to do with these drinks. But it is not, they are not alternatives to say, oh, I'm going to have this whiskey alternative and it's going to taste just like my favorite whiskey, but without the alcohol. That's just not the case. So it's very much about how to position them and celebrate them and use them, mix them in their own way, but really kind of come up front. Now, maybe that's going to change as the industry evolves. So and I think depending on which segment you're talking about, it is somewhat different. So I know, like, we can focus on spirits, but beer, for example, there are actually quite a few non-alcoholic beers that I would say are, and a connoisseur, you're going to taste the alcohol, of course, but they're solid. They're quite solid. I would say would stand on their own for their own reasons. But spirits and also wines, sparkling wines, because of the carbonation and because of the sweetness factor, I think is further along. But yeah, I think for spirits and also for alcohol-free wines, there's definitely a challenge for really kind of being upfront and managing expectations about what they're getting.
Sure. And I will say that you sent a sample pack of some of your stuff a couple of months ago, and I still have one of the non-alcoholic beers, and it's pretty stinking good. Like, if I had to drink this, I'm drinking it now and I really enjoy it. And I think this is essentially an IPA alternative, and it tastes really good. And to your point, most kind of non-alcoholic beers are they kind of let me down with the old duels, in the old duels generation. For sure. But tastiness, this is a great alternative to just having an IPA at the end of the day or something like that. So cheers. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, there's definitely, and I also think it's the more mature segment of the alcohol-free space. So, and some of it, I think, of what you're talking about, which I agree with, has to do with maturity. It is such a young space in terms of some of the things that we're seeing. Sure,
absolutely. So that being said, you have an opportunity to kind of taste a lot of different things because of your position and kind of what you're bringing to market. Have you come across, what is some of your favorite things that you've come across that are spirit-free, either spirit-free, non-alcoholic beers, wines, anything like that? Sure. You recommend?
Sure. I'll end with the spirit, since we'll probably spend more time talking about that. So we're based in Connecticut. There's a company in Connecticut called Athletic Brewing that does a very nice family of products. They've been growing rapidly, and they have an IPA and a double IPA that are my personal favorite. Mm-hmm. There are a variety of others as well. But and then in the wines, there's a product that we're carrying out of the UK called Noughty, Nough. GHTY. One of the fun things about alcohol-free is all the clever plays on words that people have come up with for some of their products. There's another product, a beer called Hairless Dog. Not a bad lineup, but also pretty clever name.
Yeah.
So those are a couple kind of in the other categories. In the spirits, there's a company out of Chicago called Ritual. They're carried in some of the in bars and clubs like Soho House in New York and a couple other places where they definitely have the bartenders really profiling and featuring cocktails using those drinks. So they have a tequila that I think is quite good. They're, as we've been saying, like it's a spirit alternative. So it's really their take on how they would express tequila, but it's not tequila, right? So, and they also have a whiskey that I think is worth trying. Mm-hmm. There's a company out of Kentucky, Spiritless, which is a startup by 3 women entrepreneurs with a Kentucky bourbon, which again is worth trying. I think is quite good in terms of seeing where this space is going and starting to see some more evolution or innovation. Notwithstanding what we were talking about earlier, that's still the case, but you can do a lot of things with these. So those would be a couple I would mention. Perfect.
So it sounds like Athletic Brewing, Naughty Wines. You said out of the UK.
NOUGHTY,
yeah. Ritual and Spiritless sound like some good companies to kind of look for.
Yeah, I think if you want to try, and those are US, American companies. There's a couple others. Lyres out of New Zealand and Australia is starting to come up with. They have quite a wide selection, mm-hmm. and they have more what I might call bar back elements too. So amaretto, a triple sec type of comparison. So they're interesting if you really want to go down the cocktail mocktail space, which we spend a lot of time talking about. So we're a retail space, but we also are really trying to be a community where people can learn about, to your point, like you're not going to drink, if you're going to try to drink Seedlip out of a bottle, you're going to be disappointed. Now, there's a bunch of things you can do with it, and we really are trying to get in to try to share that information. So Lyre's is an interesting one in terms of the breadth of the other types of barback type spirits alternatives that they have as well.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, we get quite a few samples in here as well. Sure. And the categories that really stick out to me, obviously once you move away from the base spirits, are kind of those liqueurs, the cordials. Anything that has kind of a bitter note to it are the products that seem to be shining the most for me. Yeah. So you mentioned Lyres, and I think they have... here, actually, I have it right here. The Aperitif Rosso.
That's right.
Is one of my favorite products. I believe it's basically a sweet vermouth alternative.
That's right. Great example.
Yeah, and they do a great job. They have that kind of sweet, bitter note, a little bit of the orange in there. And they also have kind of a Campari equivalent. Those two products together made a really fantastic Negroni. I highly recommend it. So I think that once you add a lot of complexity to the kind of the equivalent of the spirit, then that's where I've seen a lot of these categories for non-alcoholic really start to shine. There was another pre-made cocktail company that did something similar. They had a bottled pre-made bottles of sodas.
You're starting to see more of that, yeah.
Yeah, and they were fantastic, and their depth. They had a lot of nuance, bitter, sweet, and a lot of complexity. And I think once you're able to kind of hit those notes and kind of go off the base spirit, not really focus on the base spirit, but like the final cocktail you want to enjoy, that's where I see kind of the biggest success for a lot of brands.
Oh, for sure, and I think it gives you kind of the complexity that kind of can stand on its own in the absence of the alcohol itself. But and you're starting to see more of those ready to drink. So people want that experience, but may not be as interested in pulling that drink together themselves. Some people want that and are celebrating that. And obviously, you know much more about that than me. But I am starting to see more of that. Bitters is definitely, there are some products and some brands that's all they do, or they'll do variations off of one specific flavor profile. So there's a couple that are bitters based, starting to see like For Bitter or Worse is the name, one company. Also vinegar, kind of vinegar based. There's a one called Element Shrub, which has got some interesting ones. So yeah, if you're really getting into some more complex cocktails, there's a lot out there for you to work with in this space. Yeah, absolutely. And the soda company I mentioned is called Casamaro. They do an Amaro club soda, which is fantastic. They have a pretty decent lineup. I think we interviewed him last year. But yeah, it's some pretty fantastic adult non-alcoholic beverages. They do a great job. But yeah, that's really good to know. And I definitely have to keep my eye out for a couple more of those brands for sure. Yeah. Well, and it's funny. It's like every week. And some of that's because, we're fairly new. The space is fairly new, but it's definitely, we have no shortage of kind of samples coming in and trying out, even in this fairly narrow alcohol-free space. Sure, absolutely. So in your opinion, what are some of the kind of the biggest challenges for making cocktails with this stuff? I think you kind of hit it at the beginning is, coming up with something that has a complexity or a taste profile that stands on its own without the alcohol. I think having, which you can do in a lot of different ways, but also sometimes that can be quite involved and quite require a lot of steps or ingredients. So I think one of the challenges is to replicate that approach, but with some of the simpler, more classic cocktails. I think there's been there's success with some. So, the gin and tonic would be kind of your classic. There are so many gin alternatives out there. And, the gin alternative on its own, it's hard to make it stand on its own from a gin and tonic perspective. But when you start to look at some of the tonic alternatives that are out there that might have a cucumber or some other flavor profile to it, you start getting somewhere. So I think really starting to combine all of these different pieces, because there's not a lot of it's such a new space, and there's, you kind of have to dig to find these products. So, you have to get those products in front of the people so that they can put with the information on the types of cocktails that will go well. So they can pull everything together. Right now, I think there's a dearth or a lot of disparate knowledge. So I think the biggest challenge is giving people all the pieces. It's kind of like having a Lego set and you're missing 4 pieces. So you can't finish what you're trying to build. And it's so frustrating. It's a lot like this here. It's like, oh, I found a great gin alternative. But just with tonic on its own, it's not, it doesn't do much for me. And it's simply lack of knowledge about what's out there. Sure. So, yeah, absolutely. And I think that was definitely something that I noticed as well, is like, you spend $30 on a bottle of, X, Y, or Z spirit alternative. That's a considerable cost for a lot of people. Yeah. You're not saving money. I think that's another misperception, is like, oh, it's without alcohol, so it must be less. No, these are fairly curated or artisanal products. They're definitely not cheaper. Yeah. And that's, I think, something that surprised me as well. It seems logical, but then when you think about the production side of it, they're trying to overcome a lot of pretty significant hurdles. So I could see the cost of these ramping up pretty quick. So I think there's a lot of misconception out there in the consumer base as well, of like, there's no booze in it, so it should be cheap. Yeah. The other thing that we see a lot of, and it's a category maybe just worth calling out, and I call it adult beverages, almost for lack of a better term. And for me, an adult beverage is, if a kid, it means if you give it to a kid, they shouldn't like it. They should, it's got a very strong, it's an adult beverage, but it's not attempting to be a beer or a wine or a spirit alternative. It stands on its own, and it's, it's not flavored soda water or carbonated water or something like that. I'm seeing a lot of growth in that. Mm-hmm. So and it's often ready to serve. So there's a company in Brooklyn called Curious Elixirs, and they basically have 4 types, like type 1, type 2, type 3. And, they have a adult kind of cocktail kind of profile to them.
Sure.
But they're not kind of positioning it as being an alternative to something else.
Got it. So when they go to market and they go to label, they're not saying this is our Negroni or this is
exactly
whiskey sour. They say this is its own thing, and this is what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's really smart, especially if there's a pretty significant discrepancy of expectations, and I think that's where a lot of people can get hung up a little bit on. So I fully respect somebody just kind of going off on their own direction, saying we're not that. We're this, and we're really good at being this.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a lot more of that.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
Yeah,
absolutely. So I gotta kind of circle back a little bit. You mentioned that you were looking for alcoholic beer alternatives. Is that really kind of what started this whole thing for you? Like finding interesting non-alcoholic drinks?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to go back, and different people are involved in the business or that we come across have their own stories. But yeah, my story was really about not drinking and also not wanting it to suck. So it was basically like, I don't want to be, having to feel like I'm missing out on something. And O'Doul's would be an example of that. And I was on vacation with my family out on the West Coast, and they were at the beach, and for me, it was a work vacation. So I was at a Starbucks working, and I started just saying, I'm going to have some of this. I want some good non-alcoholic beer sent to where we were staying. And I ended up spending the afternoon, and I was like, wow, that was hard and expensive. Yeah. And I thought, what if there was a way to give people a chance to try alcohol-free? Because for a lot of people, it can be about abstinence or sobriety, but that's not what we're about. Of course, we are part of that community and support that community, but it's also about, hey, maybe I want to not drink for the month of January. Maybe I'm running a marathon. Maybe I'm pregnant. Maybe my doctor's orders are saying I should, or maybe I've just decided to try to drink less, or I'm curious about what else is out there. There's so many reasons. And that's kind of where the name came from in terms of the different roads that people might take all to get to this space where we're giving people some new alternatives. So yeah, it was very much a personal story of, I wanted an easy way to have a beer, in this case at the beginning, where I didn't feel like I was missing out on something.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of the where this started from a hospitality perspective in the bar and restaurant community, is being able to provide that customer service to somebody that doesn't want to have that, alcohol, but still wants to be part of the experience. And that's, when we started really having these conversations around like, okay, let's put some attention into this. Let's really start to be thoughtful about the kinds of non-alcoholic drinks that we're putting out to people, so that way it's not a Shirley Temple. It's not, kind of slapped together version of a mojito or something like that. So they can truly be part of this experience and feel like they're not missing out. So,
and also not get called out. So it's you're not missing out and not getting called out. Because most people, if they're deciding not to drink, they want it to be a non-issue. The analogy or the comparison sometimes that resonates for people is veganism or being a vegetarian. So I'm old enough to remember, like, in the 80s, if you had a vegetarian friend, that was a thing. And if you wanted to go out to dinner with them, you were going to be going to the vegetarian restaurant. And you were probably like, oh, I can't believe I have to go to this vegetarian restaurant. I guess I'll have the salad. So I think that's where we have been and are trying to moving now. I could be sitting at dinner with a group of friends, and one of my friends might be vegetarian or deciding not to eat meat for a period of time, and I may not even notice.
Right.
Because I probably wouldn't question if they ordered the vegetarian meal on the menu or one of several. So I think it's so normalized. It's just so part of kind of our normal restaurant and food experience that I think we're where being a vegetarian or being in a vegetarian restaurant might have been 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, no, that's a really good comparison, I think. And, the beers that you sent, there's nothing that would distinguish us from any other beer on the shelf. I mean, these are great beers. The labeling's fantastic. And I think, if you can put that on the menu and people can enjoy themselves and not be called out, I think all of that is good. I think it's all a good thing. Definitely appreciate it. And other than that, is there anything else you would like to promote? Is there any fun things you have on the horizon for yourself?
First of all, thanks for having me. Obviously, would love it if people check out betterroads.com where to get a feel for what's out there. We really try to put things into one of the things we offer are curated collections or packs. So beer, for example, if you like IPAs, try the IPA mix 6-pack. So we'll take the 6 from various producers that we have and pull them together. So you can buy a 6-pack, but it's 6 different brands. So you didn't have to buy 6 6-packs if you like to get that taste test. If you're involved in Dry January, then obviously I recommend we have a Dry January survival kit, which is basically this idea where we're trying to make it not suck, and if you're betting your friends, it might help you win the bet. So that gives you. So it's twice. We're halfway through now, but it gives you a box of recipes and product to kind of help try some of these different cocktails and wines and what have you. But no, I think, and then into Valentine's Day, I think we've got some stuff that we're planning, but we're just happy to be part of the community, and we're really just trying to help kind of let people know what's out there if they're interested in trying some of these alcohol-free drinks out for whatever reason.
Perfect. And then if somebody wanted to get in contact with you, obviously the website, Better Rhodes, it's RHODES. We should say that. We'll have some links in the show notes for that as well. But do you guys have a favorite social media outlet and handle that you guys typically use?
You can check us out on Instagram at Better Rhodes and Twitter as well. Same handle.
Perfect. Excellent. Yeah. Well, Chris, I can't thank you enough for your time and your expertise. I think, this is such a new space, and I'm glad you guys are kind of out there putting this stuff together, curating cool boxes, cool cocktails, cool alcohol-free drinks for people to try. Because I think there's a lot of really good stuff out there, and I think there's an opportunity to have some bad stuff as well. So definitely appreciate you kind of owning that space. And
thank you. And I also, for your audience, I think some of imagine the people that listen to your podcast. We're trying to engage with the bartender community, the bar community, to really kind of see what's out there and good and bad feedback. We want to hear, because I think the more we can understand where this is at, the better we can help with people that are our customers. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk to you again soon.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Chris.
Yep. Thank you.
Take care.
So thanks again to Chris for his time and his expertise around the wonderful world of non-alcoholic cocktails and spirits and mixers and all that stuff. He definitely turned me on to a bunch of new products out there, so I'm definitely going to go check those out after this podcast. So you can find him over at betterroads.com, RHODES, or if you want to find some of the brands that we talked about in the podcast today, you can head on over to shop.abarabove.com, where I have a list of some of the cool ingredients that we mentioned throughout the podcast. Also, if you're looking for bar tools, definitely head on over to shop.abarabove.com. I'm a little partial, but I think we got some pretty cool stuff over there, and it goes to support all the silly things we do like this podcast. So we'll have some more podcasts for you in the future, but until then, cheers, and I hope you guys are drinking well.